Christy Bray, and this is my History Module Project 2. I done the site visitation of Andrew Jackson's Hermitage. To start the PowerPoint, I want to go over the historical context that the Hermitage brings. A review of the Hermitage, we're going to go over the background, the events that took place, and the people who were involved with it. Looking into the meaning of the historic building with the infrastructure and architecture of the grounds, and what representation it gives to the people. We're going to cover all that in this PowerPoint. To start, the Hermitage is located in Davidson County, Tennessee. You can see here we have all two of their homes in this picture here by this source. The Hermitage is right here, and then we have Tulip Grove, which was one of the homes that Andrew and Rachel lived in before they got the first Hermitage. So this right here is a sign as you're driving down the road on your way to the Hermitage. On this side, you're going to see the sign called Old Hickory, and we know that is a name, or a nickname per se, of Andrew Jackson. My visit took place March the 7th this year. Me and my husband decided to make a day of it, and boy did we not miss out on it. Visiting the Hermitage, we found that there was more about Andrew Jackson than either one of us knew about. We figured out the parts that he played in history, how the Hermitage was designed by his beloved wife with materials used from that land. And when you're there, you get a sense that the time has stood still. So it represents to our country by showing Jackson's climb. You can see there's parts there, which you'll go into a little bit more here in just a minute. How he started at the bottom. We're going to jump into Jackson's background here in just a moment of how he was here and then he ended up being the President of the United States, which I put that ladder, it's pretty tall. I have it on here, the architecture, design, and the layout of the grounds represent what life was like during the 1800s. From the slave quarters to the mansion itself, the time period was well spoken for during the visit. You can go through there and you can see parts within the house. It just looks like you took a picture and it's still sitting there today. Found that quite fascinating. The looks and the layouts within the house was that, composed of what was during that time period, and it's just like you jump back, like you get a time portal and you jump back. I can't explain it any further, except you just need to see it for yourself. Let me go back for 1 second and explain this picture. This picture right here, this is me. This is the back of the mansion itself, which is the later known house of Andrew Jackson. So right here in this picture, we went through the museum, and when I took this picture, it is a big layout. They had several little exhibits of Andrew, and this is a timeline that he went through. So it starts out right here in 1767. Andrew's father dies. Andrew's father died when he was that of a baby. So not long after he was born, his mother became a single mom, raising 3 boys, Robert, Hugh, and Andrew. And she had to take on all that responsibility. So as a mom would, she reaches out for help to get all the help she can, and she reaches out to distant family, which are Scottish immigrants that are around. Andrew was raised by his mom and those Scottish immigrants. Now you find out as well, Hugh, Andrew Jackson's oldest brother, was fighting in the war, at the Battle of Stono Ferry in 1779. Hugh lost his life during that battle from a heat stroke. So we're already seeing Andrew's father has passed, now his oldest brother Hugh. And in the next slide, we find out about the war that Andrew and Robert took on. So Andrew and Robert were in the Revolutionary War. They actually was captured in Camden, South Carolina, and both were tortured, really. They ended up taking on smallpox, which, if you don't know, is a very, very detrimental disease. It's a virus, really, but it killed Robert shortly after. He never recovered after being captured and released. He never recovered from that illness. Now, Andrew was also extremely sick from it, but he was able to live through it. Andrew's mother died shortly after that, leaving Andrew an orphan at age 14. So Andrew and Robert went to war whenever Andrew was 13. Now his mom has passed away at 14. So Andrew has no one but himself at this point. He made a name for himself by climbing the political ladder, while also participating in several battles before beginning his climb to being a lawyer. So Andrew has went through war, battles after battle, more famously the Battle of 1812. We can get in that in a minute. He goes into being in this law practice, and he's staying with this buddy who is actually married to Rachel. And I'll cover that in just a second. But right here is a picture of a very famous quote. "We are freeborn of American citizens of the Republic, now existing in a world, and the only people on earth whose passage rights, liberties, and property which they are dared to call their own," was something famous that our Old Hickory said, which is aka Andrew Jackson. So I took this picture as well. This is a sign you see as you're driving down the road to enter the place, the site. The origin of the hermitage. So I told you we were going to talk about Rachel in just a second, and we are. According to the book from the Ball State Library, Home to the Hermitage by Alfred Leland Crabb, it quotes, "Oh, he's got plenty of faults, but if I ever saw a case of true love, they've got it." Continuing, the quote continues to say, "Even there with the company, they just sit and look adoringly at each other." Andrew Jackson had found love for Rachel Donaldson. Though married already to Lewis Robards, she wanted to flee that marriage to end up with Andrew. So we skipped it quite a little bit. Andrew and Rachel, he knew it was wrong, but he couldn't help himself. He was in love with this woman, and she loved him back because, all honestly, her husband wasn't the greatest husband in the world. He didn't really pay attention to her, so she took that attention from Andrew and fell in love with Andrew. So Andrew challenged Lewis to a duel, which he declined, and ended back up in Kentucky, where Rachel fled, and then she illegally married Andrew Jackson. So because she's still married to Lewis, she's not truly married to Andrew, and that really hurts Andrew down the line when it comes to his campaigning. So I have a picture here. This picture here is of Rachel and, of course, Andrew, coming from the Smithsonian. Jackson, he purchased a home for him and Rachel, known as Poplar Grove, more now known as Tulip Grove. Rachel and him lived there from 1792 to 1796. Jackson purchased then Hunter's Hill on the Cumberland River, which had 640 acres. So you're thinking in that time right there, the man wanted some land because he knew what the crops was going on during them, aka the cotton plantation. Later be sold due to lack of finance. So Andrew was suffering from the time of trying to keep enough revenue coming in. He had to sell the Hunter's Hill mansion. In 1804, Andrew Jackson bought the land from a neighbor whose name was Nathaniel Hayes for $425, and he and his wife moved into a cabin on the new land, which was now known as the First Hermitage. So when you go to the Hermitage Mansion, you can actually see on the back of the property line is the First Hermitage, which is a cabin, and there's another cabin that sits beside it, and that is the enslavement cabin. I done a little synopsis on Tulip Grove, which Poplar Grove, this was that home I was talking about. Absolutely beautiful on the inside. I recommend looking that up on thehermitage.com. The architecture and the paint and it's just so stunning. They definitely had that home just absolutely gorgeous. And then Hunter's Hill, I couldn't find a picture because it was destroyed by fire in 1903. It states, on the Cumberland River 2 miles north was Andrew Jackson's plantation, Hunter's Hill. So, and again, the reason he bought Hunter's Hill was for the land so he could do his cash crop, cotton. Okay, so this is my picture of the first hermitage. It's actually a 2-story cabin, which is unique for that time period. You see it here, and on the other side is actually the enslavement cabin. I put on here, you find a cabin in which Jackson and Rachel resided, and the slave cabin on the site for the expansion of the cotton plantations which needed workers. On this site, Rachel and Andrew lived 17 years before moving to the mansion today we know as the Hermitage. Right here is a little plaque they have inside the museum. It states that the first floor was used for dining and entertaining guests. That's actually more toward the big new mansion, but maybe it's not. The first floor was used for dining and entertaining guests with space for Andrew Jackson's office. The family bedchambers were located on the second floor. The interior finish included beaded molded trim and hand-painted French wallpaper. The family lived here throughout the War of 1812. In 1821, they moved into the new brick mansion, and Jackson converted the farmhouse into a single-story slave quarter. The structure remains today about 300 years behind the mansion. So, it's obviously not that now because of reasons, but you can go in that mansion, or not the mansion, you can go in that cabin, and you can actually see the ladder that they had to go upstairs. You can see how big the rooms was, and I thought that was really interesting when visiting there, how you can actually enter a lot of the spaces. Now, they did have in the house, which I'll get into here in a minute, the big house, the mansion, it was blocked off, but it had clear glass doors where you could look in. So I find that really fascinating that you could actually walk in to this cabin and look around at what would have been then. This right here is the Hermitage landscape placard. I find that so cool because it goes into depth about the limited resources and what all they had to deal with and what life would have been like back then. And then on each of these placards, it had a little sound QR, and you could go onto your app or even a headset that they give you and type in that number, and it will tell you what each one of these placards says and even a little bit more information. It talks about the beautiful landscape. I mean, when I say transporting you back into time, this right here does. You have the horse farm over behind the garden and the tomb, and it's so mesmerizing and so beautiful. This is actually took back by the first Hermitage on the way walking to it, and you can see the mansion in the distance. But the land is just so beautiful. The battles right here, each one of these had a placard I thought was really interesting. So in the museum, you're walking down that big showcase wall, and it's talking about the age of Jackson and what battles he went through. It actually had a big section over the Battle of 1812. This right here is a picture of the Treaty of Ghent, and it talks about what day, looking like December 14th, I think. I could be wrong, don't quote me, but the painting and everything about the museum was so cool. This right here was actually a plaque inside the first Hermitage, explaining Andrew Jackson's involvement in the War of 1812, which, if you didn't know, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, the Battle of New Orleans, there's a lot that Andrew Jackson done during each little battle and war throughout that time period to give him the name General Andrew Jackson. And I really think if you haven't heard, you need to dive deep. It's beautiful. I I've done a little bit further into the Creek War, the War of 1812, Battle of New Orleans, all come in the years of 1811, 1815. Jackson ran for the first time for presidency in 1822 and lost to the Electoral College. So he won by popular vote. But where everything, even to now today, you have to get those Electoral College votes, and Jackson just didn't have it. So he ran again for presidency and won. A lot of the problem we had when he was campaigning was what his opponents used against him about how he married Rachel illegally while she was still married, and it just really set a bad tone for Rachel. It was cannon fodder against Andrew during his campaign. He kept part of the political atmosphere until 1837. All the battles persisted in the way Tennessee was shaped and formed from what the original territories. The Indian Removal Act of May 28, 1930 pushed all Native Americans from their homes and made them move westward due to hostility possibilities. These wars ensued. So, Andrew, when he was president, he ordered the Native American or the Indian Removal Act. And as sad as that is, it is our history, and he did do it. It is one of the more things that he's known for that was a negative impact, now looking at it. But back then, natives were very hostile toward the whites because they felt like everything had been taken from them, and rightfully so. Andrew had to push them westward to keep the white people and the settlers safe. I took some pictures here. This right here is the front of the mansion. We actually took a tour of the mansion. Absolutely must do. This right here is your walking. This is actually in the design of Sarah's guitar. I found that out during our tour. It's a big walkway, and I wish I would have got a better picture, but it's actually in the shape. It's where carriages could go around to drop off, for balls or such, guests coming. But it's actually in the shape of a guitar, which I find really cool. And this right here is me behind the house. Right here is the kitchen quarters. And then I think even beside it is where they had the salt, where they added the salt to the meats, the meat house kind of deal. Andrew and Rachel started construction on the new property known as the mansion in 1819. The location was chosen by none other than Rachel herself because they already lived there. They're just trying to find a nice place for the mansion to be built. The hermitage is about 300 yards from the current mansion. The design of the new home was originally 2 floors and contained 4 rooms on each floor. Very old school, very basically built. The first floor had 2 parlors, a dining room, and a master bedroom. The second floor of the mansion had 4 bedrooms, and construction of these walls were 3 bricks thick. Now, these bricks were made of Tennessee mud, which I find very, very cool that they used resources of that land to construct that home. Sadly, I have to say there was no photography in the mansion, so I did go onto the Hermitage site and get you guys some wonderful pictures of the parlors and of the bedrooms. My favorite part, honestly, was the front corridor. You walk in there and you see 2 busts and you see this spiral staircase, and it is just like, wow. Like, you feel like you're in the presence of the President of the United States. It's so cool. Fun fact, one of the guides told us, there is this picture that Andrew Jackson he had to have, he thought it was Christopher Columbus. Fun fact, Christopher Columbus never had any pictures painted of him nor taken of him, And so there is a random Italian guy on the president's wall because he thought it was Christopher Columbus, and that is what he was told, and he must have it because not everybody had one. But fun fact, it's actually an Italian merchant. Right here is another cool thing. I mentioned the bust. they were of two of Andrew Jackson's cabinet members, Lewis Cass and Levi Newberry. So it kind of just gives a fancy feel to that room, like you're walking into an elegant corridor. You can see the parlors as you walk in. One was made for business and one was made for family. I mentioned Sarah's guitar. Sarah's guitar is a known artifact in the front or the back parlor because you can see it sitting there beside the table as if someone was going to play it. And actually there is a piano in the background as well in the family lounge that is still from that era that they recently restored. But in the front parlor, there's actually a cigar, or not a cigar, a candlestick that was given to Andrew Jackson by none other than George Washington in the Battle of Yorktown. So that candlestick is actually laying on a little table in the front parlor where he conducted his business. So I did find these from hermitage.com. Here's one of the best. Here is the beautiful staircase and the chandelier, and I mean, it's gorgeous. The wallpaper is one of the main wallpapers that are still from that time period. So it is literally like walking back in time. This is the front parlor and this is the back parlor. This is the piano I was referring to, and right here you're looking in. So this is actually a clear door and you can see. Now all these rooms were connected. I think that was kind of purposely made by Andrew or Rachel so that way they didn't have to constantly be going through one room and out the other, in a sense, to go back into the corridor. I find that it was a great layout for that time period, you know, room by room. If he got done with business, he could just directly walk into the family room. Another thing I did is I took the bedrooms, two of the bedrooms, and got pictures for you. This right here was actually more of Andrew's study, his office, and across the hall was his son's office. Andrew done more of the law stuff and trying to figure out more stuff for the country, where Andrew Jr. Was across the hall trying to work on stuff for the home, the taking care of the place. This right here is the youngest of Junior's daughters, her bedroom. It actually still has these dolls laying in the floor, which are the known artifacts of Junior's daughter, Sarah, I believe. I got some pictures. This right here is pictures of the cemetery, which is also where the tomb is, and the famous garden of Rachel. So Rachel's main thing that she loved to do was garden. During the springtime, I actually went when it was still kind of yucky looking. But if you look at pictures later in time, like summer or even late spring, it is just absolutely filled with beautiful flowers. The Ladies Hermitage Association have really outdone themselves on keeping it pristine. So right here, there's actually a path from the house to the tomb, which Andrew wanted to put the tomb in Rachel's favorite place. Rachel passed because of depression. She was brought depression and sadness and sickness. She just didn't make it through Andrew's campaign because of all the ill will that was sent toward her. Jackson honored her by having her entombed in her favorite place. So he took a spot out of her garden, which you can literally walk through the garden up into the tomb. The tomb itself is fenced off, which was, you know, meant for good reason. On one side it has Rachel's spot, and one side it has Andrew's, and then even over on the side, over here, Andrew's side is the family cemetery. So that's where Junior's buried, Junior's kids, the Jackson family. So Andrew and Rachel actually didn't have any kids of their own. They adopted out and had children. What you'll find though, and I'll show you in later pictures, there's actually one of their black family in that cemetery, and I find that so moving and interesting. So this talks about the add-ons. There was some stuff that happened. There was a fire. We had some tornado, you know. He decided while he was in the White House, he was going to have renovate it. He added rooms that we known as the West Wing, East Wing, and Smokehouse kitchen behind the home. So I showed you earlier that room beside the kitchen is actually the smokehouse, but I had actually put in a picture of it here in a minute, and you can see the salt where they would salt the meat and get it ready to be smoked. 1837, a fire broke out, known as a slow burning fire. The fire itself had to burn itself out, but it was so slow that the Jacksons were able to preserve most of their stuff. And they hired architects to rebuild it. A lot of the original decor was destroyed, but it was replaced. Interesting enough, that wallpaper that you see as you walk in, I don't believe it was destroyed by the fire, so I find that really cool. I found another part in one of the books from the Vol State Library, The Hermitage Home of Old Hickory by Horn. It states that the general was the Prince of Hospitality, not only because he entertained a great many people, but because he entertained the poor, belated peddler, and was welcome at the Hermitage as the President of the United States, and made so much at his ease that he felt as though he had got home. So Andrew opened his home to everybody. It didn't matter if you were yellow, blue, poor, rich, white, black, all of it. I mean, he was the home to go to and stay. That's why they had all them bedrooms upstairs as well. I mean, people would stay for a long time. So right here, in this picture here, I took myself. This is the smokehouse. So right here is where they would salt and get these meats prepared, and then they would hang them back here, you know, to smoke out. This here is the dining room. It is just so, I don't want to say vintage, but elegant. Elegant's the better word. They had all the place settings. And see, an interesting fact about Jackson, he never sat at the head of the table. He always sat with his people so he could be a part of the conversation. He never wanted anyone to feel belittled, so he never wanted to sit at the head of the table. This right here is the kitchen add-on. I'm assuming they would probably cook in that fireplace, but I seen a pie safe there. Now, I did add in, which this did reshape the Hermitage a little bit, not much. An interesting fact, in 1998, there was a tornado that caused some damage to the forestry on the lands, taking out the older original trees on the property. So these big cedars got wiped out by this tornado. But luckily, the cleanup allowed the museum to profit off of it by turning some of this wood into limited edition guitars, which there is one on site at the museum. To know that you had a president's a wood from a president's home into a guitar, I think that is pretty cool, and you know, it was a way to put money back into the museum and to restore it. This right here is the Jackson Plantation, which this is really the only picture we could find. So I had talked about earlier about the guitar looking. So right here you would enter, and it's kind of got the little guitar effect right here. Over here is Rachel's tomb. I found this picture on the history.com. I put in here, defining a plantation. So this is from dictionary.com. It is a large farm or estate in a tropical or semi-tropical zone for the cultivation of cotton, tobacco, coffee, sugarcane, and etc. Typically by enslaved, unpaid, or low-wage resident laborers. So yes, that means that Andrew Jackson did have slaves. I'm not going to go into full on this. This right here is probably one of the main things why that Andrew Jackson chose this, is because in the 1800s there was a demand for cheap cotton. Native Americans had fertilized the soil, which made it nutritional rich soil to produce cotton. Jackson's plantation, like others who produced cotton, needed the workers to help. There was at times Jackson had so many slaves to work the fields, but also some set out for house slaves. But Jackson was good about his slaves. He took care of his slaves. Which brings me to my next part, enslavement. These are hanging up on the wall in the museum as you make your way back toward the grounds. This is one of the more famous slaves that was a part of the Hermitage. Her name was Hannah. Hannah was the head of household slaves. She preached occasionally. She was married to Aaron. It tells all of Hannah's story right here, and I find that's really cool that they bring out, you know, the importance of who was who. This right here is Betty and John Fulton Sr. in the old Nancy family home. So this is actually a site on the Hermitage, and they have extricated, I don't know if that's the correct word, the site. So this right here is a plaque out there by Uncle Tom's cabin, or Uncle Alfred, my bad, I'm sorry, Uncle Alfred's cabin. And it just basically states how the Jackson family treated the black slaves. He called them his black family. I mean, he didn't want to mistreat his slaves. He didn't go out there and beat his slaves like some slave owners did. He took genuinely care of his slaves. He owned more than 160 slaves. 100 alone were field workers for cash crops such as cotton. He owned 300 to 500 slaves in the years of 1788 to 1865. He had other slaves or house slaves to take care of the family's needs, whether it be cooking, cleaning, gardening, and driving carriages. About 30 approximately, the rest being field hands. The slaves have quarters on the premises that usually house between 10 to 15 slaves. Now there is slave cabins, but one of the more famous, like I said, was Uncle Alfred. So this right here, Uncle Alfred actually was a slave there. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't apply to the Hermitage slaves. The slaves had to escape to the Union to become free. After it passed fully, slaves such as Uncle Alfred, one of Jackson's favorites, he stayed on the premises. He became a farmer, guide, and one of Jackson's black families, so much so that he was buried near Jackson's tomb. Now, I mentioned that earlier. Uncle Alfred actually made it into the family cemetery. He's got a spot between the family cemetery, and then there's Alfred, and then there's the tomb of Jackson. So he's actually closely buried to Andrew. This right here is inside of Uncle Alfred's cabin. You'll notice that the beds that Uncle Alfred had compared to the bed that Andrew Jackson had, they were no comparison. But he still had it nicer than most. This right here, when you walk in, you get to see all that. And then this over here was where the other slaves really stayed. And there was other slave homes. Mainly, there was some back toward where the crops was. And then there was the ones closer to the house, like Uncle Alfred's, who was a house slave that would maintain the home. So this was actually outside of Uncle Alfred's. So as far as moral take on enslavement, yes, it was wrong, but during this time period, the Hermitage property portrays the building as historically accurate as possible. So whether it's good or bad, this is how the nation was and how we became today. I will go over here in just a little bit about the cemetery that we found. But this placard right here, it shows pictures of the sites of, like, back here where the slave cemetery is and where the farmhouses are for the slaves. It has the dinner bells, or the hey, we need you bell that the family rung. And there's just a lot going on at the Hermitage that you can see. There was the dinner bell that I'm standing next to in some pictures that they would ring out for the slave hands to eat. You know, there's quite a bit. So right here, I said I would get into it in just a minute. This is actually my husband. He's walking near it. This was uncovered in 2023. they found where of the property. So right in here is probably where the hermitage is. Then you have to walk all the way this way back past the spring house and it almost feels like half a mile back to the enslavement. So they buried the slaves quite a bit away, but they were able to uncover some of that. And they opened this in early 2024. 2 rounds of ground penetrating radar confirmed the presence of the cemetery with 28 possible graves. All this evidence points to the area as being the location of the enslaved people at the hermitage. So they have this area fenced off, and they have actually marked some of the graves with big rocks. But right here, I just added, jumping away from the enslavement part, there's a lot to the enslavement part and how it shaped Tennessee. Tennessee was pretty much, we were Confederate state who bordered the Union, but we were the first to recede back to the Union, but it is what it was, and Andrew Jackson was part of it. So if you go there, you can see some historical features of how slave life was like back then. This is a portrait of Andrew painted at the Hermitage. You actually see his horse farm there. And then this is his placard on his side of the tomb. But what I put in here, the site and what it represents. So I'm explaining the dinner bell. This is me at the back of the mansion by the dinner bell. The site and what it represents is important to show what a person can accomplish in life and how someone of poor stature can come from nothing and become something. So it's a representation of how Andrew climbed that ladder. It shows the daily life of a true leader of our country and what he dealt with in his personal life. So you're jumping back. When you walk in the mansion and you go into one of the hallways and you're looking into Andrew's bedroom, his slippers are still sitting there. You know, that is probably one of the coolest things ever to know that, hey, the leader of our country at one time was just as normal as you and I. This right here is the tomb. I've said that before. It's a piece of history that is not just pretty, but ugly as well, for they do not attempt to hide enslavement because it was part of our past. It was a part of this country. And you're looking at it as you can conserve that history and make it known, and that way past doesn't repeat itself kind of deal. Like, this is what it was like. We're never going back to it. We know it was bad, but this is a little taste of what they had to endure. This site doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. Some would find it a piece of presidential history. Some would find it as a piece of entrapped souls who didn't deserve of what happened to them. And I can't say that enough. I find it as a cool piece of history. Yes, slavery being there, I am curious to know what it was really like. And the site of the Hermitage really puts it into perspective. I put that painting in there again. In summary, the lay of the land, geographical and physical evidence of the time period is still present today. Went over that again. You can see the land features, you can see the house and how the architecture and the wallpapers are still original. Finding the enslavement cemetery, was a big ordeal. It really put on perspective of what they had to do with their dead. It's just a really cool place to visit. I didn't expect what I got out of it. The museum accurately depicts the time and the events that happened in Andrew Jackson's life. Like I said, they've got artifacts there that you wouldn't find anywhere else, except the president's home. The site was impactful to Tennessee. The state of Tennessee purchased the site from Andrew Jackson Jr. when he was having financial struggles, but being permitted to live there throughout his life. So he pretty much made a deal with the state. Hey, I get to live here, but you can own it and use it whenever, we're gone. To later being given a portion of land to be managed by the Ladies of the Hermitage Association to restore and preserve the site of the 7th president. How many more sites can you find of presidents? And what are we on now? Our 50th something? This is our 7th president. I find that so cool that we can go through history. 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, and that is still there. I feel like I explained the questions, explained how the site fits in Tennessee history overall. We talked about it. We talked about how it represents of what that time period represented. How you can see how the slaves had to ordeal there, you know. I feel like I went over that. Think about what this place represents. We talked about that, the site and what it represents. And what attributes, tools, technology at the location speak to the time period. So there was all kinds of stuff there. The technology that they're using to help do the audio, I mean, they had attributes, tools, technology at the location that speak to the time period. Look at what they have as far as look at I'm going blank here. what shaped that land, how they break down the buildings when they're excavating the site, and they have the tools where you can actually see into the rooms while still preserving them. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there that attributes to the time period, like the architecture and the just the restoration of the place itself, the artifacts. What major events took place here, and how are those events impactful for Tennessee? So, what were major events? Hello, the president. That was a pretty big ordeal. The plantation, the enslavement, all of that was pretty big ordeal. It was impactful for Tennessee because it shows what Tennessee was like back then. It shows the home of a nation's leader. You know, I can't say it enough. I feel like this was definitely a place that you should visit, especially if you love history and Tennessee history at that. But this does conclude my presentation. I hope that you learned something today. I have put in my works cited, and I want to say thank you for hanging out with me.